Throughout the NFL offseason here in 2024, there are going to be days like this, a notable day on the National Football League calendar that we explained to you, because starting today, we have a 2-week window where the franchise tag can be placed on members of individual NFL organizations. Not all 32 NFL clubs have a candidate who could be potentially placed under the franchise tag or transition tag tender, but some big names around the sport. A 2-week window starts on this Tuesday, and it runs through Tuesday, March 5th. Of course, this was a big conversation last offseason, Donnie, with some of the big running backs around the sport. Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, and namely Lamar Jackson, that kind of sent his contract tizzy with the Baltimore Ravens into its full tailspin. So we'll look at some big names around the NFL that are up for the franchise tag and what we expect their organization to end up doing. I mentioned at this time last year, one of the names that highlighted the franchise tag window, Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. This time around, one of the names that will highlight the franchise tag window, Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. Of course, they placed him under the tag. He held out. They agreed to a deal, a restructured deal for a 1-year deal that kind of looked like what the franchise tag would be. The estimated value under the tag for a running back this season, as everything works up, $11.3 million. So tag, trade, or extend, what do you think the G-men do with Saquon Barkley entering 2024?
Yeah, and by the way, we'll start here with this, the franchise tag in itself, right? It's one of the more wild things that we see in sports. That thought process through, Ben, does make a lot of sense. Hey, look, we just don't want to lose our superstar player. We want rights to him. We're going to pay him like the highest paid player in the sport for 1 year. It should be great. The players hate it, and also the teams hate it at the same time. So I have no idea how it keeps getting negotiated back into CBAs when nobody actually likes it. And you say, well, Donnie, how could they not like getting 1 year at the highest mark? Well, because it's football. You could get injured and nothing is guaranteed to you. So you want that long-term commitment and that money up front here as opposed to the franchise tag. From a team perspective, let's just take a quarterback situation, right? If it was Lamar Jackson, well, okay, we'll tag you $55 million a year, which you can't kick that can down the street and crushes your overall, salary cap situation for a team. So under those guys, most teams and players want to avoid this. Now, let's get to the New York Giants and Saquon Barkley. One of the worst won franchises over the past 5 to 6 years has been the New York Giants by doing things like drafting a running back high when the team wasn't able to win or wasn't ready to win football games. It was drafting a quarterback that had no business being in New York and then doubling down on said thing by making him a $45 million a year player. Now, that doesn't have any fault to do with Saquon Barkley. He wants to be a Giant, and he's a quality running back. But if you are the New York Giants, what are you doing re-signing Saquon Barkley? You're not winning next year. You don't even have your quarterback yet. So the simple fact of the matter is, if he's a great running back, sooner or later you turn into a not-so-great running back. Not because of what you can't do on the field. It's the injury process and the amount of carries that you're putting on your body. The tread on the tires just goes away. For my money, if you're the New York Giants, you try to work out a trade and get anything back for Saquon Barkley. And again, it's not a knock on Barkley. He could be tremendous on a team that's willing to put the money in to win a Super Bowl and who's ready. Saquon Barkley to the Buffalo Bills, absolute home run. Saquon Barkley and the Giants, a ridiculously bad option. You can't sign Saquon Barkley. You got to try to trade him if you're the Giants.
Completely agree. And I think if the New York Giants did put the franchise tag tender on Saquon Barkley, what would that relationship look like, knowing what we saw entering last year in 2023 and before even training camp began for the G-men? I think there will be a trade, or at least the New York Giants will go around the NFL to see what value and assets they can get back for Saquon Barkley. It's probably not going to be a first-round or second-round pick, maybe a third, fourth, fifth-round selection, and a couple of those draft picks for Saquon Barkley. The Giants in a very interesting position, though, because of where all the money and draft picks have been tied up for Big Blue, with Saquon and now Daniel Jones. The Giants can get out of the Daniel Jones contract after this year, but he's really still their guy, at least financial investment-wise, for 2024. But Big Blue does have the 6th overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft. A precarious offseason ahead for Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen after last year, such an optimistic offseason for the New York Giants following 2022. One of the biggest names who I think will be fascinating to follow in this franchise tag market, the wide receiver in Cincinnati, T. Higgins. Jamar Chase is going to get his. Joe Burrow has already got his. What happens to T. Higgins? He has expressed a desire to be a number one option for an NFL team. He's not necessarily that in Cincinnati. 1-1A, I could hear you, but he's not going to be the guy for the Bengals with Jamar Chase there. So what do the Bengals do, Donnie, with T. Higgins?
By the way, shout out to T. Higgins, too. No holdouts here, playing under a contract, saying, you know what, I don't have too many future years here left onto it, but I'm going to be a good soldier and put up great numbers. T. Higgins is going to be a very good wide receiver for another organization outside Cincinnati. Let's also remember this. The Cincinnati Bengals were one of those teams that was like, you know what, practice facility, the same as the stadium itself. I don't want to pay for anything. And by the way, my stadium name is Paul Brown Stadium. Oh, no, Joe Burrow wants a contract. Guess why it's called Paycor Stadium now? Because they couldn't afford to just go on as is. They had to sell assets enough to just get their quarterback to stay in town. So the reason I'm building this is you can't sign everybody. There is a salary cap in the NFL unless you're guys like Stan Kroenke of the Rams and you just continue to print more money and, kick the can down the road. Cincinnati doesn't do that. Right. But also the reason being is Jamar Chase is going to come over the top with a ski mask like you haven't seen before, and rightfully so, to be maybe the highest paid wide receiver in the history of football. He's going to fight that out with Justin Jefferson. So case in point, we can't have a top 3 paid all-time quarterback have the highest paid wide receiver in the history of the sport, and they go, hey, T, how about number 3 overall? Because T. Higgins isn't going to take a discount. Like, you know what, man? Jamar's my boy. Let him make that $200 million contract. I'm good over here with $75 million as a total contract. That's not happening here. It's just the way the NFL works. You can't have 2 of the top highest paid wide receivers and quarterback and still have enough money for defense here. Lou Anarumo probably would end up retiring if they signed T. Higgins, so they go, you know what? We don't have any room for anybody on defense. Just make it happen here. It's just a sign of the times. T. Higgins would love if he could stay in Cincinnati and get paid. That's just not going to happen. Yeah. He's probably just going to end up walking at this point.
$20.7 million is the franchise tag expected salary or value for the wide receiver slot. Again, franchise tag estimated value is based on the annual average salary of that position in the National Football League. It's why the running backs one is less and hasn't really seen a lot of increases over the last 5 to 7 years. It is the only position, in fact, around the National Football League that has not seen growth and yet decline. Even kickers and punters have had their franchise tag tender rise in value. $20.7 million for the wideout spot around the NFL. Now let's go to the Super Bowl champs. If I say the Kansas City Chiefs, you're probably thinking Chris Jones with his contract situation. He can be franchise tagged, although unlikely because it would be his cap hit based on his camp number from a season ago, which would be around $32 million, much higher than what that franchise tag tender value is for a defensive lineman. So the main candidate for KC, Legerius Sneed, of course, had a sensational year under Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive back for the Chiefs. Value for the cornerback position, $18.7 million. Legerius Sneed had a huge year. Of course, he was known for knocking the ball out of Zay Flowers' hands late in that second half in the AFC Championship game. KC starts to have the cap hit of Patrick Mahomes' contract take its toll, as it did this year, and they still won a Super Bowl championship. What do you expect the Chiefs to do? Tag, trade, extend Legerius Sneed?
Certainly different than what we see with Saquon Barkley and the New York Giants. The reason I bring this up is they're not in the Super Bowl window at this point here. The Kansas City Chiefs are all in right now. You have to extend him here. Now, typically, you're right, so why don't you just tag him here? Well, last time we started talking about anger and tagging players, do you remember opening night against the Detroit Lions? Man, remember how good Chris Jones was? Yeah, he was really good sitting up in the stands with his agent side by side as his team played on the football field. You can't have that here. You got to keep the harmony in the locker room. You must extend the cornerback position here, because the one thing you do know is, let's just say, Ben, it cost you a chance to go, you know what? It's either going to be Legerius Sneed or we add a top-flight wide receiver. Well, what did we do last year? Well, we had Legerius Sneed and won a Super Bowl and didn't have a top-flight wide receiver. Look how that worked out. I do the same thing. You can't risk losing him. Your window is now. Even if it costs you, Ben, 3 to 4 years down the line, your strike zone is right now to win more Super Bowls and go for a three-peat at this point. You got to be able to find that a way for me to extend Sneed.
Brett Veach is one of the best general managers and front office executives around the NFL. Of course, he is the GM in Kansas City. But Mahomes starts to have that cap hit take its impact into this Chiefs roster in terms of how they build it. Chris Jones at the Super Bowl parade said, "I am coming back." If his agents had told him to say that or not, he did utter it. We would expect to see a rework deal for Chris Jones as well. How many people can they afford to trade? That franchise tag tender in the value of $18.7 million might actually be more than what the Chiefs could broker in a deal for Legerius Sneed. We'll see how they play things out. Josh Allen could be franchise tagged, not the quarterback in Buffalo. That would be the edge rusher linebacker in Jacksonville for the Jaguars. He is a prime franchise tag candidate this year. Linebackers, $22.7 million. Officially, that is his roster designation. Defensive ends, $20.2 million. They might want to recategorize him as an edge rusher and save a couple $1 million there in Duval County. I would expect the Jags to franchise tag Josh Allen. What do you think, Donnie?
Yeah, tag and work out a deal here. You can't lose. Again, like we talked about the cornerback position, there's so few and far between dominant pass rushers, which is the way you change the landscape in the NFL. You can't just let him walk. And also, if you think that you can get away with, hey, you know what? Couldn't come to an agreement on a tag. $20 million seems like a lot. That's not a lot of money for defensive ends ready to get capital on the free market here. You're talking about a contract that's probably going to deal with $80 to $90 million in guaranteed funds. You think he's actually going to come to the table and say, yeah, I'll play 1 year at $20 million? No shot here. If you tag him, he's missing part of the season. You better work out a long-term deal and agreement there because, again, these guys just don't grow on trees. You got to find a way to sign him because he's not going to work, man, under the tag. He's just not going to do that.
You saw the stats, by the way, in the production out of Josh Allen. He is one of the most talented young edge rushers in the National Football League. 17 and a half sacks last year for a Jacksonville defense that mightily struggled at the end. But Josh Allen was one of the highlights of that defensive front. And that's where Jacksonville needs to build moving forward. We talked about the AFC championship prices yesterday, Donnie. The AFC South now as a division, once it was kind of an afterthought, actually might be one of the more fun and exciting divisions with the young up-and-coming Houston Texans led by C.J. Stroud. And despite the stumble last year down the stretch, the Jaguars being a player, offensively need to protect Trevor Lawrence a little bit more, and defensively need to keep those stars in-house. That is Josh Allen.
Yes, it is. And you can't lose them if you want to have a good season here. You can, hey, let's just go out in the draft and repeat this. Keep them in-house, but also they come at a premium price tag. Have you seen the amount that outside linebackers and defensive ends are making lately in the NFL? Yeah, again, he's not coming back under the franchise tag with a smile on his face.
No. Yes, the reworked extension we would expect for Josh Allen. Don't forget, you can tag somebody and still negotiate in this window up until a certain point as we approach training camp.